The rain came like a slow drum, steady enough to erase footprints if you waited long enough. Neon from the diner sign bled into the wet asphalt, turning puddles into small, trembling moons. Inside, Elena Morrow moved through the shift with the practiced, weary choreography of someone who had learned to perform grief on autopilot. A smile at the window, a refill of coffee before the cup felt empty, a forced laugh at a joke she did not remember the punchline to. Her apron was tied the same way every night, the not a ritual to hold herself together. The diner smelled of burnt sugar and lemon oil, of pie that had sat under heat lamps too long, and of the constant, honest salt of customers who came and left because the world outside kept pressing on. Elena took their orders, carried plates, folded receipts into a neat stack like little promises she couldn't cash. Each shift was a thin, bright thread she used to stitch over the wound she kept around her ribs, the brother she had failed to save, the small, sudden absence that could not be argued back into breath. When she slid a plate in front of a man hunched over the counter, his eyes were already on the window, on the alley beyond it where the streetlight made a silver lane down the wall. "Storm's coming," he mumbled, voice thin as the steam rising from his cup. Elena followed his gaze without asking. Outside, under the rain and the sodium light halo, a figure staggered into view, too straight for someone dripping in the weather, too composed in the shoulders for a drunk. He was pale in a way the fluorescent diner light exaggerates, like the way a photograph bleaches out shadows. A long coat clung to him, cut with an old-fashioned elegance, collar turned up against the wet. He moved like someone trying not to be noticed, but failing because his presence carried the wrong kind of stillness. He stumbled, then sank, folding into himself as if the street had opened and swallowed his feet. The man at the counter cursed softly. Elena felt a prickle behind her sternum, the one that used to be small and manageable until it had not been. Without thinking, she wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to the door. The bell chimed and the warmth of the diner slipped behind her. Rain hit her face. The air tasted of iron and wet stone, and there was that small, almost absurd hush that falls when people forget the world for one single sharp thing. Elena moved to the alley, a thin figure against the long city night. The fallen man lay halfway in the gutter, his coat fanning around him like an old flag. Up close, his skin had the translucence of moonlight. His lashes were dark and long, casting tiny shadows on cheeks that looked almost too delicate to carry a life. She knelt. The sound of her own breath felt too loud, a drum inside a hollow bone. "Hey," she said, because that was what you did when you found someone who might need you. "Sir, are you all right?" He did not answer. There was a shallow rise and fall, but it was slow, like someone trying to slow the awful business of being here. Elena touched his wrist with a fingertip. Fingers so cold they made her suck in a little shocked breath. She expected blood to be the bitter, red proof of a wound, the familiar warmth of life spilling away. Instead, a small stain pulsed faintly on the cuff of his sleeve, like a living light under the rain. It was not red. Under the streetlight, it gleamed with an impossible hue, a liquid like quicksilver caught between dusk and the last star. It slipped through fabric with a softness that made Elena's skin itch. The glow was wrong for human blood. It hummed, low and foreign, the color of something found only in old stories and in places where the world folded differently. For a moment she thought she had imagined it, the brain, traitor that it was, conjuring the surreal from the fatigue. A memory came unbidden, uninvited. Her brother on a hospital bed, pale and too hot, a steady drip of red sliding into tubes like small lies that promised healing. Elena closed her eyes against it and tasted copper on the back of her tongue anyway, proof that memory can resurrect the smallest sensations. She pressed harder on the man's wrist, because the human thing to do is to press where it hurts and believe that pressure is rescue. He coughed once then, a soft, ragged sound that made her jump back. His hand rose like something waking from a dream, and when his fingers curled, they brushed her gloves. The contact was electric in the way that human contact sometimes is, but it carried a distinct shock, a whispering ache that threaded through her like a thin wire. Elena felt suddenly very small under the vastness of whatever had walked into the alley. "Call someone," she told herself, the voice steady because steady is armor. Her fingers rummaged in his coat for a phone, her heart a drumbeat she could not silence. In the pocket she found a black object, old as anything made before convenience, and a single word etched in silver on its case. She did not read it yet. She did not think to. Instead, she looked up. The streetlight halo trembled with rain. The glow on the man's sleeve blinked like a tiny, stubborn beacon. Alina's hands were steady, but inside, the ritual knot she tied around herself every morning pulled taut and threatened to fray. The city hummed around them, unconcerned. The diner light still leaked warmth down the block. A life hung between the gutter and the gutter's edge, and the rest of the world continued in its small, indifferent orbit. Alina swallowed. The rain tasted like the edges of a memory she had not healed. She lifted the stranger as best she could, an animal response that was somehow also a choice. When she bore his weight, the world felt like a stage tilted just so, precarious and decisive, the way nights sometimes are before something breaks or mends for good. The phone felt wrong in her hand, heavier than it should have been, like it remembered things. Black and cold as stone, it gleamed faintly under the diner's neon spill. No brand, no logo, no seams. Just one name on the screen in silver letters, old-fashioned script that shimmered like quicksilver. Father. Alina hesitated. The unconscious man lay still, his chest rising shallowly. The glow beneath his sleeve had dimmed, but not disappeared, like embers waiting to breathe again. Every instinct screamed at her to call an ambulance, but her other hand refused to let go of that strange device. The diner door rattled in the wind behind her. "Hey," the cook shouted. "You okay out there?" She forced a nod she didn't feel. "Yeah, her voice faltered when she looked back down. The man's pulse under her fingers wasn't there anymore. Not gone, but moving, like a small animal trapped in a maze beneath his skin, erratic and inhuman. She swallowed hard and pressed the single number on the phone. For a moment, nothing. Then a click, no dial tone, no ring, just silence. And then a voice. "You are not my son." Alina froze. The voice was deep, measured, each word carried weight, ancient and absolute. It wasn't anger she heard, nor confusion, but a kind of cold recognition that stripped away pretense. Her throat went dry. I found him in the alley. He collapsed. I thought he was hurt." A pause. "Then describe the place." His tone was quiet, but the air seemed to thicken around her, pressing on her lungs like deep water. The streetlight flickered once, twice. "Elk Street, behind Casey's diner," she said. "He's not breathing right. You need to." Thunder rolled across the city like the earth had turned in its sleep. The voice interrupted, softer this time, but it wasn't comforting. It was curiosity sharpened to a blade. "Human, where did you find my son?" The word human landed heavy, not as insult, but as classification. Like the way one might address a creature from another cage. Alina glanced down. The glow from his sleeve pulsed again, faint and rhythmic. Her fingers trembled. He's right here. I think he's dying." Silence again. A silence that wasn't empty, more like listening. She heard something faint on the other end, the whisper of wind, the distant toll of bells, the crackle of fire far away. Then the voice spoke once more, quieter but somehow closer. "He cannot die, but he can suffer." Her heart thudded. What does that mean? Who are you?" "I am the one who made him. And you—" A sound, low and guttural, half a sigh, half a growl. Electricity trembled through the streetlights, then steadied. The neon sign above the diner blinked, half its letters dying out, leaving only "Eat" burning red against the rain. "You have already changed things." Her skin prickled. "Look, I just called because I thought he needed help. If this is some kind of, stay where you are." His words froze her in place. They were not a threat, they were law. "Do not move him. Do not speak his name, even if you think you know it. The storm will reach you soon." She wanted to ask what storm, but the line went dead. The screen went dark, swallowing its faint light until only her reflection stared back, small, pale, eyes wide, with the reflection of something she couldn't name. Then came the sound, soft at first, like wind pushing through broken glass. The air shifted, electric. The rain, which had been falling in steady lines, bent sideways as though drawn toward some invisible point beyond the alley. In the diner, every bulb flickered in unison. The jukebox crackled and died mid-song. And then, headlights. A black car, sleek and silent, rolled to a stop at the far end of the street. The kind of car that didn't belong to this neighborhood or this century. Alina's breath caught. The world seemed to hold still. Inside the car, through tinted glass, a figure waited. She couldn't see him, only the faint glimmer of two eyes that caught the lightning and didn't look away. The phone in her hand vibrated once, a final pulse, before shattering cleanly down the middle. And as the thunder broke above, the air tasted of metal and old storms. Something ancient had heard her call and was coming. The black car pulled to a stop with the silence of something that didn't obey the rules of engines. Its headlights cut through the rain, and for a heartbeat, the alley looked carved from glass, suspended, breathless. The door opened with a soft click that sounded far too human for what stepped out. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Tall, broad-shouldered, but built with an unnatural symmetry, like something sculpted before the idea of imperfection was ever invented. His presence seemed to shift the air. Even the rain slowed, uncertain if it should fall on him. Lucien Vailmont. The name would come later, whispered like a prayer and a curse, but in that moment he was only a silhouette dark coat, eyes like the gleam of steel drowned in candlelight. The wind moved around him instead of against him. Every drop that touched his skin turned to mist. He didn't look at her. He looked at the body in her arms. Alina's voice caught in her throat. He just collapsed. I tried. Lucien's gaze cut toward her, and the words died. His eyes were not red, not gold, they were colorless, as if they'd forgotten what color was. She felt, rather than saw, his power, the hum of something vast and old, condensed into the shape of a man. He crouched beside the fallen boy, his movements impossibly precise. Fingers brushed Aaron's neck, the gesture almost tender. For a flicker of a second, the mask cracked, grief, naked and ancient, flashed across his face. Then it was gone. Alina Morrow, he said, and her name on his tongue felt wrong, as though he were reading it from inside her thoughts. You called me, she swallowed hard. I didn't know what else to do. He wasn't breathing right. You thought he was human. It wasn't a question. Lucien drew a small dagger from within his coat. Its edge glimmered like a shard of frozen moonlight. He pressed the blade to his palm and drew it slowly across the skin. No blood spilled, not at first. Then a single drop welled, black-red and luminous, shimmering with faint silver threads that moved of their own accord. Alina flinched when he tilted his hand. The drop fell onto Aaron's lips. The reaction was instant. The boy's body jerked, not violently, but as if a current of heat had rushed through veins too long cold. The light beneath his skin flared, spreading from his throat to his eyes. His breath caught, then steadied. The wound on his temple sealed with a sigh. Lucien's face didn't move, but the corner of his mouth softened. Relief or something older than that, something he refused to name. When Aaron's breathing evened, Lucien rose. Your blood called to him, he said. Alina blinked. What? He stepped closer, and she had to fight the instinct to retreat. The air thickened. His voice, low and rich, filled the space between them like smoke. When you touched him, Lucien continued, his blood reached for you. My kind does not bleed for mortals, not unless something answers. I don't understand. You don't need to, he said simply. His gaze lingered on her throat, then her hands, the faint shimmer of light that still clung to her fingertips from when she'd held Aaron. You've touched my son's blood. That binds you to my world. Her pulse quickened. That's insane. I was just trying to help. He tilted his head, studying her as though she were a riddle that had somehow defied centuries of logic. You would not have survived his touch if you were ordinary. He turned toward the car. For your safety and for his, you will come with us. I'm not going anywhere with you. He stopped. The rain had started again, softly at first, but it fell around him, never on him. He looked back, and the faintest curl of something that might have been a smile crossed his lips. You misunderstand, Lucien said, voice like thunder whispered through silk. That wasn't a request. Before she could step back, the world blurred. The air around her folded, shadows stretching into arms. The alley, the diner, the flicker of neon, all vanished into a rush of darkness that smelled faintly of storm and iron. When the world righted itself again, Alina stood in a vast marble hall lit by pale fire. And in the distance, a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward her, glowing faintly, hungry and old. Lucian's voice echoed softly beside her. "Welcome to the House of Night Vale." Elena woke to the slow rhythm of wheels against stone, a carriage rolling through somewhere deep and endless. The air was cold, not cruelly, but with that stillness found only in cathedrals and tombs. Her eyes opened to velvet darkness. For a heartbeat, she thought she was blind. Then, a faint phosphorescent glow spread along the carriage walls, etched sigils and veins of silver light pulsing like slow heartbeats. She sat up too quickly. The space swayed. The seat beneath her wasn't leather or fabric, it felt alive, the way roots do when wind moves through them underground. She pressed a hand against it and flinched when it seemed to exhale beneath her palm. Across from her sat Lucian Valemont, unmoving, watching. He was composed the way statues are, as if movement was a courtesy he rarely extended. The faint glow painted his features in shades of moonstone and smoke. Elena couldn't tell if the light belonged to him or simply obeyed him. "Where?" her voice cracked. "Where am I?" "The threshold between your world and mine," he said quietly. "The House of Night Vale." It was not an explanation so much as a sentence. Outside the carriage window, the world shifted in impossible ways. Streets folded inward, buildings bent like they were bowing. Shadows stretched into spires. The stars above were unfamiliar, too large, too close, moving in slow, deliberate orbits. For a moment she thought she saw shapes flying between them, winged, predatory, and unbound by gravity. Elena swallowed. "This isn't real," Lucian's eyes found her. "Reality is a matter of inheritance." The carriage stopped. The door opened by itself. She hesitated, but his gaze made hesitation feel like defiance. She stepped out into a courtyard paved in black stone that shimmered faintly with veins of silver, the same glow as the sigils in the carriage. Beyond the gates rose towers without windows, curving in spirals like the ribs of some vast creature. The sky was both night and dawn, stars suspended in violet haze. Dozens of figures stood waiting. They looked human mostly. Their skin carried a faint sheen, their movements too deliberate. Some had eyes reflecting candlelight without candles. A few wore expressions so perfectly still they looked sculpted. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "She bears his scent." "A mortal?" "No." "Something else." She touched the blood. Elena's heart hammered. The air felt charged, the way it does before lightning. The whispers burned against her ears until Lucian stepped forward. Instantly, silence fell. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "This is Elena Morrow," he said, voice carrying easily through the vast space. "She saved my son's life. She is under my protection." That word, protection, moved through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Faces turned sharper. Fear, curiosity, envy. A woman stepped from the line, her beauty sharp enough to wound. She bowed slightly, but her words dripped with venom. "The mortals of this age are bold, my king, to breathe the air of the night court uninvited." Lucian didn't look at her. "Boldness is not a crime, Lady Varys, but insolence can be." The woman inclined her head, retreating. Elena felt their gazes crawl over her, dissecting, measuring. She hugged her arms to her chest, feeling very small. "They hate me. They fear what they do not understand," Lucian said, "and envy what they cannot be." He started walking, and she followed because not following felt like stepping off the edge of the world. They entered a vast hall lined with mirrors that didn't reflect her. Only Lucian's figure appeared in them, fractured, multiplied, eternal. The ceiling was painted with constellations that shifted as she watched. Servants, pale as smoke, moved soundlessly between pillars, their eyes downcast. Elena's footsteps echoed, the only human sound in a place built to outlive sound itself. She caught her reflection, faint and flickering, in a single mirror near the throne. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something else looking back, her own eyes glowing faintly, a pale silver shimmer running through her veins like threads of light. Lucian paused before an arched doorway that led deeper into the castle. "You'll stay here until I decide what to do with you." Her temper broke through her fear. "Decide? I didn't ask to come here. I just tried to help someone." He turned to her, expression unreadable. "And in doing so, you crossed a line that doesn't uncross." He moved closer, and she felt it again, that impossible pulse of power beneath the air. His voice lowered to a near whisper. You smell of my bloodline now. The court will not touch you, but they will never see you as human again. Alina looked past him, to the horizon where the sky cracked between day and night, and she realized she wasn't sure which side she stood on anymore. Somewhere deep within the palace, a bell tolled long, slow, ancient. As if marking her arrival to a world that had already decided her fate, Alina woke to the sound of rain, or something like it. The rhythm echoed against stone and glass, soft and irregular, as though the palace itself exhaled weather. Her room, vast, ornate, suffocatingly still, seemed to hum faintly with unseen life. She sat up on the silken bed, still wearing the torn remains of her diner uniform beneath an embroidered cloak someone had left for her. The walls shimmered faintly with lightless patterns, shapes that only appeared when she wasn't looking at them directly. Then she heard it, a voice, soft but strained, calling her name from beyond the door. Alina! It was him. She hesitated, then crossed the cold marble floor, pushing open the heavy door. The corridor beyond was dark except for a faint glow at its end. A doorway cracked open. Inside, the air felt warmer, alive. Aaron Valemont lay propped against pillows, his skin pale as frost, eyes a deep storm gray that seemed older than his face. His shirt hung loose, revealing the faint tracery of veins glowing faintly beneath, the same light she had seen on the street. He smiled weakly. You stayed. Alina stepped closer, uncertain. I didn't have much choice. He gave a small laugh, brittle, tired. That sounds like my life in a sentence. There was a pause. The silence between them was not empty, it shimmered, charged with something unspoken. You shouldn't be awake, she said softly. Your father said. My father says many things, Aaron interrupted, looking away. None of them about freedom. He reached for a cup of dark liquid beside him. It looked like wine until she saw it swirl with something thicker, redder. He noticed her expression. It's not human, he assured her gently. Synthetic. My father insists we feed with restraint. Something fragile in his tone made her believe him. I saw you, Aaron said suddenly. That night, you tried to help me, most wouldn't have. Alina folded her arms, uneasy. I've seen too many people left to die, I couldn't do nothing. Aaron studied her, eyes sharp despite the fatigue. You have grief in you, the kind that never leaves. Her jaw tightened. You sound like him. No, Aaron murmured. He uses grief as a weapon, I just recognize it. Alina looked away, but the words hit too close. For a moment, the palace walls seemed farther away. He leaned back, breathing shallow. I left because I wanted to know what it's like, to wake up without duty. To eat, laugh, fall in love, things my kind have forgotten. His voice faltered on the last words. Alina sat on the edge of his bed, careful, like he might vanish if she touched him. And did you find it? Any of that? Aaron's eyes flicked to her, uncertain, almost boyish. For a few hours in the diner, watching you move between tables, humming under your breath, it was ordinary and beautiful. She felt her face heat. You were watching me, he smiled faintly. Not in the way that sounds, just seeing you made it easier to imagine what being human felt like. Alina looked at him then, truly looked. The fragile curve of his smile, the exhaustion lining his face, the quiet ache in his voice. He wasn't the monster she'd feared, he was a prisoner of his own eternity. I think, she said softly, you'd hate being human too. Aaron laughed, low, hoarse. Maybe, but at least it would be mine. A silence settled, gentle, heavy. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A pulse of recognition, fragile and dangerous. Your father won't let you go again, she whispered. Aaron's expression darkened. No, but he underestimates what dying once can teach you. He turned his head toward the window, where faint streaks of pale light trembled against the endless night sky. The sun never rises here. Not fully, but I remember it. Maybe that's enough. Alina followed his gaze, heart twisting. You really hate him that much, Aaron's voice softened. I don't hate him. I just don't want to become him. She didn't realize she'd reached for his hand until their fingers brushed. His skin was cool, but the touch sent a strange warmth through her chest, a thread that hummed with something neither of them understood. He looked down at their joined hands, then up at her. You shouldn't be here, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Alina smiled faintly. You said that like you don't mean it. Aaron's lips parted, but whatever he meant to say vanished as the door creaked open. Lucian stood there, framed by shadow, his expression unreadable. For the briefest second, something raw flickered in his eyes, jealousy, fear, or something older. "Elena," he said softly, "you found my son awake." She withdrew her hand. Aaron turned away, the fragile light between them dimming. Lucian's gaze lingered on both of them before he added, quieter still, "Then the real danger begins." The throne hall of the House of Night Vale was vast, built not from stone, but from shadow petrified by ancient magic. The air shimmered with faint whispers, remnants of vows made and broken within its walls. Torches lined the columns, burning with a blue flame that cast no warmth, only light enough to see the faces of those summoned before the vampire king. Elena stood at the center of the hall, trembling in her borrowed gown, a fabric dark as ink, threaded with something that glowed faintly when she moved. Around her the court gathered like ghosts, nobles, sentinels, courtiers of the night. Their eyes gleamed red, silver, and violet. None of them blinked. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from obsidian veins, sat Lucian Valemont, the vampire king. He was still as a statue, posture perfect, gaze cold. His beauty was almost cruel, symmetrical, timeless, unyielding. A crown of black steel rested on his brow, but the weight of his presence was what filled the room. Elena could feel his eyes tracing the rhythm of her heartbeat. "You know why you are here," he said finally, his voice smooth as frost. It didn't echo, it resonated, as though the hall itself bent to listen. Elena swallowed hard. "Because I helped your son." A murmur passed through the court like wind brushing glass. Lucian's gaze sharpened. "Helped!" He rose from his throne, descending the marble steps with deliberate calm. "You touched him, you bled for him. You bound yourself without knowing it." Her pulse quickened. "I don't understand." He moved closer, not walking, but gliding, every step a command. When he stopped before her, she could see the faint shimmer of power in his eyes like silver flames behind glass. "Blood," he said softly, "is law in our world, a thread that connects life, power, and allegiance. You touched my son's blood and his yours. That act, however unknowing, marks you." Her stomach tightened. "Marks me for what?" "For the throne," whispered someone among the court. Another hissed, "A human cannot bear the royal scent." Lucian silenced them with a glance. The hall fell into silence so absolute that Elena could hear her own breath catch. He turned back to her. "Your touch binds you to the Valemont bloodline. The council will see you as a threat, a contamination. And they are not wrong. If left unclaimed, that bond could be twisted, used to weaken my son, or worse, destroy him." Elena's voice trembled. "I didn't ask for any of this." Lucian's tone darkened. "And yet here you are caught in the oldest magic we possess." Aaron's voice cut through the silence. "Father, enough!" He stepped into the hall, pale but defiant, wearing a simple tunic, eyes fierce. The courtiers parted reluctantly as he passed. "She saved my life. If anyone should be punished, it's me." Lucian's jaw clenched. "You were reckless, Aaron. You broke the boundary between realms. You dragged her into it." "She didn't choose that," Aaron shot back. "You can't make her pay for what your rules caused." Elena looked between them, father and son, both shadows of the same agony, the same pride. Lucian exhaled slowly. For a moment, his composure wavered, just enough for something raw to surface, regret maybe. Then it was gone. "I cannot unmake what has been done," he said quietly. "But I can contain it." He turned to her. "You will swear the blood oath." A hush fell. Aaron's face went pale. "No," Lucian's eyes flicked toward him, sharp as a blade. "Silence." He stepped closer to Elena, and though he didn't touch her, she felt his power press against her skin like the air itself had weight. "The blood oath will bind your life to mine. You will live as long as I do. You will die if I do. And through that link, none shall harm you or use your connection against us." Elena's throat tightened. "So I'd be your prisoner." He tilted his head slightly. "A guest, bound by law, protected by power." The word protected felt hollow, but there was no escape in his tone. She looked at Aaron, his expression desperate. "Don't," he whispered. "If you do this, he'll own your soul." Lucian heard him. His voice dropped low, dangerous. "Better her soul be bound to mine than torn apart by those who would hunt her." Elena's pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed to run, but the weight of the room, the eyes of the court, and the quiet grief in Aaron's voice held her still. "What happens if I refuse?" she asked. Lucian's answer came without hesitation. "You die before dawn." The words hit like a cold blade to the chest. She drew in a shaky breath, then nodded once. "Then do it." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the hall. Lucian's gaze softened almost imperceptibly, admiration or sorrow or both. "Very well," he said. He reached into his coat and drew out a dagger, black steel, etched with runes that shimmered faintly. When he sliced his palm, the blood that welled up glowed silver, burning the air with a scent like ozone. He held out the blade. "Your turn." Elena's hand shook as she took it. The metal pulsed, warm, alive. She pressed it to her skin and flinched as a line of blood appeared, red against the silver glow. Lucian caught her hand, their blood mingling where their palms met. At that contact, something surged between them, a current, ancient and alive. The world dimmed, the court vanished. There was only him, his voice, his heartbeat, vast and endless. He spoke in a language older than time. "Blood to blood, breath to breath. You live if I live, you die if I fall." The power flared, a burning thread coiling through her veins, racing to her heart. Elena gasped. Her knees buckled. He steadied her, his touch impossibly gentle now. "It is done." When she opened her eyes again, she saw faint lines of silver across her wrist, like veins of light. Lucian's expression was unreadable, but something unspoken passed between them, not dominance, not pity, something deeper. Aaron stared at them both, voice breaking. "You didn't have to do this." Lucian looked at his son, his tone softening just slightly. "I did." Then he turned back to Elena. "Rest now, you will feel my heartbeat for a time." "Ignore it." But that night, when she finally collapsed into uneasy sleep, she felt it steady, slow, ancient, pulsing through her dreams. And somewhere in the darkness of his chamber, Lucian felt her fear echo through his chest like a second heartbeat. The nights in the House of Night Vale were endless. The sun existed there only as a rumor, a faint pulse behind eternal clouds, never breaking through. Time blurred. Sleep came rarely, and when it did, Elena dreamed not her own dreams but his memories that weren't hers. Ancient halls, a woman with dark hair laughing beneath moonlight, the sound of her name, Seraphine, and then silence, always silence. When she woke, Lucian was waiting. He stood by the window of the study, a high chamber filled with tomes bound in skin and silver, maps of constellations that didn't belong to Earth. Elena hesitated at the threshold. The faint light from the candelabra painted his figure in soft gold, too beautiful, too wrong. "You're late," he said without turning. "You didn't tell me there was a time," she replied, crossing her arms. Now he did turn slowly, like a tide shifting. "When one is bound to a king, time ceases to belong to them." "Then maybe I'll keep what scraps I can," she muttered. A flicker of amusement ghosted across his face, brief, almost human. "Defiance. Good. You'll need it to survive here." He gestured for her to approach. On the table lay a dagger, a small glass vial, and a book open to a page covered in sigils that glowed faintly. "You will learn to read this," he said. "The language of the blood court, words that can wound or protect you." Elena raised an eyebrow. "And if I don't want to learn?" Lucian's expression softened, but his voice remained cool. "Then you'll die before you understand why," she sighed. "You really have a way of motivating people." "Fear," he said simply, "is the oldest teacher." Hours passed. He guided her through symbols, pronunciations that felt like cuts on the tongue. She failed often. He corrected her, sometimes with patience, sometimes with cold precision. Yet in the quiet pauses between lessons, the atmosphere shifted. When she stumbled over a word, his tone softened. When she flinched from his proximity, he drew back, not insulted, but wounded, as though reminded of what distance cost him. At last, she pushed the book aside. "You've lived for centuries," she said. "Why bother teaching me anything? Why not just keep me locked away?" Lucian regarded her for a long moment, the candlelight catching in his eyes like twin moons. "Because ignorance breeds fear, and I've ruled long enough to know that fear kills faster than blades." "That's not the whole answer," she said quietly. He smiled, a sad, distant thing. "No, it isn't." They stood in silence for a while. Beyond the window, the palace gardens shimmered under false starlight, flowers that glowed faintly, feeding on moonfire. Lucian's voice, when he spoke again, was softer. I had a wife once, human. Before the throne consumed what was left of me. Alina froze. She saw the man beneath the crown, he continued. She believed love could bridge eternity and mortality. He exhaled, a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so hollow. She was wrong. What happened to her? Lucian's gaze drifted to the window. Time happened, and my hunger. Something fragile flickered in his expression, regret so old it had become part of him. I killed her, he said, almost to himself. Not with teeth or blood, with what I am. The words struck like a chord deep within Alina. For the first time, she saw the truth beneath his perfection, the ruin behind the marble. She knew, he added softly. She forgave me before the end, but forgiveness changes nothing. It only carves the wound deeper. Alina's throat tightened. You still loved her. His eyes met hers, unguarded for the briefest moment. I still do. Later, he handed her the dagger. Cut your palm, he said. She hesitated. Again, trust me. Reluctantly, she did. A bead of red welled up, glowing faintly. He extended his hand, the same gesture as the blood oath, but this time there was no spell, only a quiet understanding. He pressed his palm against hers. Their blood mingled, faint light pulsing like shared breath. Now, he said, focus on my voice, feel the current. The warmth that spread through her wasn't pain. It was something deeper, awareness, connection. She could feel his emotions, restrained sorrow, curiosity, and beneath it all, fear. She gasped. You're afraid. Lucian's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't pull away. Even kings fear what they cannot control. And what's that? His gaze lingered on her face. You. The room seemed to hold its breath. He withdrew his hand. Enough for today. Alina's pulse still thrummed with his heartbeat. The tether between them glowed faintly, invisible but unmistakable. She felt the echo of his sorrow, his restraint, his impossible longing. And for the first time, she wondered if monsters were only what time and loss had forced them to become. As she left the chamber, she glanced back. Lucian still stood by the window, watching the night that would never end, his reflection in the glass alone, but no longer untouched. Somewhere in that silence, something between them shifted. Not love yet, not trust, but the beginning of both. The Moon Hall was the heart of the vampire dominion, a cathedral of marble and shadow suspended between worlds. The ceiling arched high above, carved from glass so dark it mirrored the stars beyond, each one pulsing faintly with the heartbeat of ages long past. Tonight, those stars seemed to watch. Alina stood beside Lucian as the court gathered, the ancient lords of the Blood Council, draped in silks and power. Their faces were ageless, beautiful, and terrible, eyes burning with centuries of hunger and disdain. The scent of blood and incense wove through the air, making her dizzy. Aaron lingered at the edge of the assembly, his expression tense. Though his father's heir, he stood apart, the mark of his half-human blood never forgotten. Lucian's voice broke through the murmur. We convene to address the breach between mortal and eternal. My son's descent into the human realm and the binding that followed. A ripple of whispers, sharp and cruel. Alina felt their stares like knives. She wanted to vanish, but Lucian's hand brushed against hers, a silent command to stand firm. She could almost feel his thoughts pressing through their bond. Do not bend. Not here. Lord Varros stepped forward, tall, alabaster-skinned, with hair like spun iron and eyes of liquid amber. He was one of the oldest, older, some said, than Lucian himself. His smile was a blade. With respect, my king, Varros began, bowing only slightly. This meeting should not be about mercy. It should be about law. Lucian's tone was calm but edged. The law has been followed. The human is bound to me. No one may touch her. Varros circled Alina, his gaze predatory. A convenient decree. Yet it was your son who spilled royal blood upon her skin. The act is old magic, dangerous, binding beyond command. Tell us, my king, how long before your pet carries his curse? Alina stiffened, fury rising despite her fear. I didn't ask for any of this. Varros laughed softly. Mortals rarely do. Lucian's voice turned to steel. Enough! But Varros only smiled wider. "You forget, my liege, I was there when the same transgression was punished before, when she stood where this girl now stands." The air stilled. Lucian's eyes flashed crimson. "Do not speak her name." Varros stepped closer, ignoring the warning. "Seraphine, was it not? The mortal who thought she could love a king of shadows. The council begged you to end it before she bore the half-blood prince. But you," he sneered toward Aaron, "chose sentiment over law, and she paid the price." Aaron moved before he realized it, his voice cracking like thunder. "You killed her," the hall erupted in whispers. Varros tilted his head. "She broke the edicts. I merely carried out the will of the council." Lucian's power surged like a storm, torches flared, the floor trembled. His voice rolled through the hall like the sound of an avalanche. "And I allowed it." The admission silenced everything. Alina looked at him, at the pain he no longer hid. His mask had cracked. For a heartbeat, she saw the centuries of guilt behind those immortal eyes. Varros smiled, sensing blood in the water. "Then you understand why we cannot allow history to repeat itself. This human," he pointed at Alina, "is another Seraphine waiting to unravel your throne." A murmur of agreement rippled through the lords. Alina felt her stomach twist. They would kill her or worse. Lucian stepped forward, his voice low and lethal. "You mistake her for a weakness. She is a consequence of your arrogance. She exists because our world refused to change." Varros's smile faltered. "You would defy the council for a mortal?" "I would defy eternity itself," Lucian said, "if it meant ending its rot." The room went utterly still. Even the flames bowed lower. Aaron stared at his father not in anger but disbelief. For the first time, Lucian's defiance wasn't cold authority. It was raw, desperate love. Then Varros's laughter cut through the silence. "Then you doom us all. Do you even know the prophecy you risk invoking?" The word hung in the air, prophecy. Alina's breath hitched. Lucian said nothing. Varros turned toward the council. His voice rose, echoing through the vaulted chamber. "The blood-bound woman shall awaken the king's heart and end the night eternal. One shall rise in light. One shall fall to shadow. And the world shall bleed dawn once more." The hall trembled. The stars beyond the glass ceiling flared, as if hearing their own names spoken aloud. Whispers erupted like fire. "The blood-bound woman, the end of the night. She bears the mark. The prophecy stirs." Lucian's hand tightened at his side. Alina felt his pulse in her chest, his fear, his fury, and something deeper. The memory of that same prophecy whispered over Seraphine's grave. "Enough," Lucian said. But this time, the command wavered not from weakness, but from understanding. Alina turned to him, heart pounding. "Is it true? Am I that woman?" Lucian's gaze softened, full of sorrow. "Prophecies are half-truths wrapped in fear. They say what we dread most and call it fate." "But you're afraid," she whispered. His silence was answer enough. Varros bowed mockingly. "Then you admit it, she will bring ruin or salvation. Which will it be, my king? Love or annihilation?" Lucian's eyes burned crimson. "That choice," he said, voice like thunder, "is mine alone." Power surged from him, a wave of force that shattered the torches and sent the lords sprawling. When the smoke cleared, Lucian stood unmoved, his cloak sweeping like the wings of some divine wrath. Alina felt the tremor beneath her feet, not just power, but the world itself shifting. Something ancient had awakened. Varros rose, smiling faintly through bloodied lips. "Then the game begins." He vanished in a flurry of black feathers, leaving only silence behind. The council dispersed in fearful murmurs. Lucian turned to Alina. "You see now why you cannot leave this realm." She met his gaze, no longer with fear, but with defiance. "You didn't defend me for politics. You did it because of her." His expression faltered, the truth too raw to deny. "Perhaps," he said softly, "or perhaps because of you." Above them, the glass ceiling cracked, a hairline fracture spreading across the stars. And from somewhere deep in the dark sky beyond, a faint light bled through. The first hint of dawn in 1,000 years. The royal crypts lay beneath the castle, an endless labyrinth of stone corridors and whispering tombs. The air was heavy with ancient dust and the scent of old blood. Candles flickered against walls carved with the names of kings who had ruled before light itself faded. Aaron moved through the darkness alone, his boots echoing faintly. The flicker of his torch caught the shimmer of something carved into the marble, Seraphine's name. He paused. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw her reflection, kind eyes, soft smile, but when he reached out, it vanished into shadow. He clenched his jaw. "I can't live in your ghost anymore," he whispered. Footsteps broke the silence. 3 figures emerged from the dark, the rival lords. Varros at their head, flanked by Lady Nyra and Lord Corvin, their power like a cold wind that snuffed out the nearest candles. "You came," Varros said softly, his smile cutting like glass. "The prodigal son returns and not to kneel." Aaron straightened, torchlight trembling in his hand. "You said you could break my father's bond." Nyra tilted her head. "We can, but every bond has a price." Aaron's throat tightened. "Her life." Corvin stepped forward, his voice a low hiss. "The blood oath ties you to the king through the girl. If she dies, the chain shatters. You will be free, free to choose your path, your throne, your soul." Aaron hesitated. The words "your soul" twisted in his chest. He thought of Alina, her laughter when she teased him about royal manners, her quiet strength when facing Lucien's wrath. He thought of how she made him feel almost human again. And then he thought of his father, the cage of legacy, the suffocating shadow of a crown. "I never wanted to hurt her," he said quietly. Varros's eyes gleamed. "Then consider it mercy. Better her death than her damnation beside him. If you do nothing, the prophecy will bind her to your father forever. Is that what you want, for him to steal what you love?" The word love felt like poison and truth at once. Aaron closed his eyes. "How?" Varros smiled. "Bring her to the crypts before the next moonrise. Leave the rest to us." And then they were gone, swallowed by the dark like smoke. Alina awoke that night with a start, the faint hum of the blood oath thrumming under her skin. Lucien's heartbeat pulsed through her dreams, quick and uneven. Something was wrong. She wrapped her shawl tighter and slipped into the hall, following the pull in her veins. It led her downward, past the throne room, through the gates of shadow, into the crypts below. Her torchlight fell on a figure standing before Seraphine's tomb. "Aaron!" He turned sharply, guilt flashing across his face. "Alina, you shouldn't be here." "I felt you," she said softly. "The bond, it burns when you lie." He flinched. Behind him, the shadows shifted, whispers movement. She saw them then, Varros and the others, cloaked and waiting. The realization struck like a blade. "You made a deal," she breathed. "With them. It's not what you think." Her voice trembled. "They want to kill me, to break the oath." Aaron stepped forward, anguish in his eyes. "I just wanted to be free. I thought, if I could end this bond, if I could stop Father's control." Tears welled in her eyes. "By ending me?" The silence between them felt heavier than the tombs. He dropped to his knees. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. Please, you have to believe me." Alina looked down at him, at the prince who had once saved her life, now undone by his own fear. "I do," she whispered, "and that's what makes it hurt." From the shadows, Varros's voice cut through the air. "Enough talk, it ends now." Power surged, a crimson bolt of magic streaked toward her. Aaron moved before he could think, throwing himself in front of her. The blast struck his chest, sending him sprawling. Alina screamed. Lucien appeared a heartbeat later, fury incarnate. The torches exploded in blue flame as he raised his hand. "You dare touch my blood!" Varros and his cohorts staggered back as the crypts shook violently. Stone cracked, and the air screamed. Lucien's power flooded the chamber, the kind that could unmake worlds. Varros's laughter echoed even as the walls collapsed. "Too late, King of Shadows, the betrayal is done. The bond is tainted. The prophecy moves." He vanished with the others in a swirl of black ash, leaving silence and ruin. Lucien dropped to Aaron's side, lifting him as the boy struggled to breathe. Alina's hands trembled as she pressed against the wound. "He saved me." Aaron looked at her through half-lidded eyes, a faint smile on his lips. "Guess I finally did something right." Lucien's voice broke, the first crack of emotion Alina had ever heard from him. "You foolish child." Aaron coughed weakly. "Father, she's not the curse. She's the only thing keeping us human." Then his head fell back, breath shallow, fading. Lucien's power rippled outward, a storm of anguish. The entire castle trembled. Distant towers shattered. Thunder roared across the kingdom as if the sky itself grieved. Alina reached for Lucien's hand. "He's still breathing, barely. We can save him." but Lucian's eyes were crimson fire, fixed on the place where Varro's had vanished. "I swear by blood and shadow they will answer for this." Above them, the crypt ceiling cracked open, spilling moonlight like a wound. And deep within the earth, something ancient stirred, the blood oath pulsing like a living heart, its rhythm now fractured, unstable, and alive. The storm began at midnight. Not a natural one, no wind or thunder born of the sky, but something older, darker. The kind of storm that breathes, the kind that remembers. From the highest tower of the House of Night Vale, the crimson lightning struck downward instead of from the clouds. Each flash tore open the veil between worlds, letting in a shriek of wind that smelled like ash and blood. Elena woke to the sound of shattering glass. Guards shouted in a dozen tongues, the clang of steel, the hiss of burning magic. She stumbled from her chamber, heart pounding, the mark of the blood oath on her wrist glowing like a wound. Then the door burst inward. Black-armored soldiers, the sigil of Varro's blazing on their chests, surged inside. Before she could scream, rough hands grabbed her. Her nails clawed uselessly at iron grips. Someone struck her temple, and the world went white. When she awoke, she was in the throne hall, but it was no longer the place she remembered. The great mirrors were cracked. Firelight danced through the fractures like veins of hell. The ceiling bled rainwater and smoke. At the center stood Lord Varro's, pale and triumphant. Behind him, a circle of glyphs carved into the marble pulsed in rhythm with Elena's heartbeat. "Ah," Varro said, turning toward her, "the king's mortal tether awakens." Elena's throat was dry. "Where is Lucian?" Varro smiled, a cruel, moonlit curve. "Fighting a war he's already lost." He motioned to a pair of acolytes, who dragged her forward. The glyphs beneath her feet flared bright red. She cried out as the light burned into her skin, the mark of the blood oath writhing like something alive. "His immortality depends on balance," Varro said softly. "Your mortal blood anchors it. If we twist that anchor—" He leaned close, his breath cold. "We can make a god bleed." He raised a blade, carved from obsidian, singing with old curses, and cut the inside of her palm. Her blood fell onto the marble. The glyphs turned black. Somewhere in the distance, a roar answered, vast and terrible, echoing through stone and storm. Lucian Valemont felt it before he saw it. In the upper battlements, he cut through Varro's soldiers like wind through fog. Each movement was poetry and ruin, too swift for mortal eyes, too violent for the living world. But the moment Elena's blood touched the glyphs, his strength faltered. He dropped to one knee. His vision swam. The bond burned in his chest, her pain, her fear, and the magic that tied them began to fracture. The shadows around him recoiled like wounded beasts. "My king!" one of his captains shouted. "The gates are breached, they have her." Lucian's eyes flared red. "No one touches what is mine." He leapt from the battlement. Lightning split the sky as he descended, his power twisting the storm itself into a spiral of blood and fire. He landed in the hall in a thunderclap, marble cracking beneath his boots. "Varro's!" The rival lord turned, unshaken. "Too late, old friend, she is your undoing." Lucian saw Elena, pale, trembling, chained to the sigil circle, her blood dripping down the steps. Something ancient inside him snapped. "Release her," he said. Varro's smirked. "You still think you command me?" He thrust his hand toward the glyphs. The spell ignited, and crimson lightning arced upward, striking Lucian square in the chest. The king screamed, the sound tearing through the air like metal on bone. His body convulsed as veins of light crawled up his arms. The centuries of power that had kept him immortal began to unravel. Elena struggled against her chains. "Stop it, you'll kill him," Varro's only laughed. "That's the idea." Lucian staggered forward, smoke curling from his skin. Every breath came ragged, every step shaking the ground. He looked at Elena, eyes filled with both fury and tenderness, and then, through clenched teeth, whispered a word she didn't recognize. The storm above answered. Lightning crashed through the shattered dome, striking Lucian's chest. But instead of destroying him, the energy bent around him into him until his veins glowed with light. He raised his hand, and a pulse of pure white fire erupted outward. The spell circle shattered. The chains turned to ash. Varro stumbled back, shouting in disbelief. "You sacrificed your eternity." Lucian's voice was soft, almost human. "For her." The explosion that followed shook the entire palace. When the light faded, Lucian was kneeling, smoke rising from his skin, his immortality bleeding out like mist. The centuries weighed on him all at once. His face looked older, fragile. Alina crawled to him, hands trembling. "Lucian, please." He cupped her face weakly, a faint smile flickering. "You're safe, that's all that matters." Behind them, Varos rose, wounded, furious, ready to strike again. And then Aaron appeared. He looked half-dead, bloodied, burned, eyes hollow with guilt. "Father," he rasped, "I did this." Lucian turned, sorrow in his gaze. "You were deceived." Aaron shook his head. "No, I wanted freedom, and it cost everything." Varos lunged toward Alina, dagger raised, but Aaron moved faster. The blade meant for her buried itself in his chest instead. Alina screamed, catching him as he fell. Varos recoiled, realization dawning too late, the blood of a royal mixing with mortal blood inside the broken sigil. The magic recoiled violently, the storm collapsing inward. Lucian reached for his son, voice breaking. "Aaron," the boy smiled faintly, blood on his lips. "Guess, I finally did something right." His body convulsed once, then stilled. The storm above imploded, lightning and blood turning to rain. The rival lords vanished into mist, their power shattered by the ritual's collapse. When the silence returned, Lucian and Alina knelt in the ruins of the hall, the world still trembling from what had been lost. Lucian gathered Aaron's body, cradling it gently. "He wanted to live," Alina whispered through tears. Lucian's eyes, once bright with immortality, dimmed to the color of fading dawn. "And so he shall, in the place where death remembers mercy." He rose slowly, carrying his son's body toward the crypts, the broken crown glinting in the flicker of dying fires. Behind him, Alina fell to her knees, the mark of the blood oath on her wrist now pulsing faintly with both their heartbeats, one fading, one human, and one somewhere in between. Outside, the rain washed the blood from the marble, and above the shattered palace, the first light of dawn broke, red as a wound the house of Night Vale stood in ruins. Marble halls once eternal now lay cracked and blackened. The scent of blood and rain lingered in the air, heavy, metallic, and strangely holy. Alina knelt beside Aaron's body. His face, though pale, seemed peaceful now, the faintest trace of a smile still curved at the corners of his lips. He had been the bridge between two worlds, and the cost of that bridge had been his life. Across the hall, Lucian Valemont stood motionless, a figure carved from loss itself. His coat was torn, his once immortal frame trembling beneath the weight of exhaustion. The firelight reflected in his eyes, no longer ageless silver, but something softer. Mortal. He looked at his son for a long moment, then at Alina. "The storm is not done," he said quietly. "The seal is broken. If I do not end it, both realms will fall." Alina rose unsteadily. "Then let me help." He turned to her slowly, almost in disbelief, as if the concept of help, of shared burden, was something foreign. "You've done enough," he murmured. She shook her head. "Not enough to save you." He stepped closer, his presence still immense despite his fading strength. "You don't understand what you offer." "I do." Her voice broke but held firm. "You gave me your world's protection. You saved me when you didn't have to. Now let me save you." She lifted her wrist, the mark of the blood oath still pulsing faintly, and pressed it to his lips. "Drink!" Lucian's eyes darkened, hunger and pain flickering like lightning across his face. "If I take from you now," he said, voice low and rough, "I become the very thing I swore to destroy. I've taken enough from this world. Let me give back for once." Tears burned in her eyes. "Then what happens to you?" He smiled, small, tired, but real. "I become part of the dawn." The ground trembled again, deep, thunderous. From the broken sigil beneath Aaron's body, tendrils of shadow began to rise, writhing like smoke from a dying fire. The underworld stirred, seeking to claim what the storm had freed. Lucian turned toward it, the air around him beginning to hum with the old language of power. His coat flared behind him, and the blood mark on his chest began to glow, a crimson sun against the ruin. Alina stumbled forward, reaching for him. "You'll die if you try to seal it." He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw not a king, not a vampire, not a god, but a man who had carried centuries of silence, grief, and guilt alone. "Then I will die whole," he said. He placed a hand against her cheek, his thumb brushing away her tears. Tell them that once there was a night without monsters. She caught his hand in both of hers, voice trembling. You were never the monster, Lucien. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to pause. The air itself held its breath. Then, softly, tenderly, she rose onto her toes and kissed him. It was not the desperate kiss of survival, nor the reckless one of desire. It was the kind of kiss that forgives, that mourns and blesses all at once. When she pulled back, light had begun to bloom from where their skin met, golden, pure, burning through the shadows. Lucien stepped away, into the circle of light. The glyphs that had once bound the underworld to his throne began to ignite. He raised his hands, whispering in the ancient tongue, each word a thread of his life unraveling. The air cracked with power. A column of light erupted, piercing through the palace roof and into the storm. The darkness screamed, recoiling, folding inward, devoured by the dawn. Elena shielded her eyes as the brilliance consumed everything. And then, silence. When she looked up, Lucien was gone. Only the echo of his voice lingered, soft as wind over stone. Let the night rest, and let the dawn remember. The first rays of sunlight in centuries broke through the clouds. They touched the towers, the marble, the ruins, and for the first time, the vampire city gleamed with warmth instead of hunger. Elena stood alone amid the golden ruins, her wrist still glowing faintly with the mark of the blood oath, now no longer a bond, but a memory. She looked toward the rising sun, tears on her cheeks, and whispered, "You gave it back, all of it." Somewhere, beyond the light and shadow, the King of Night slept, not dead, not lost, but reborn in the world he had finally allowed to see the dawn had fully broken. Mist curled through the remnants of the vampire city, softening the once harsh edges of its Gothic towers. The marble that had reflected only moonlight for centuries now blushed beneath the touch of morning. At the city's center, Elena Morrow stood upon the cracked steps of what had once been the throne of Night Vale. Her apron and diner uniform were long gone, traded for simple linen and quiet strength. She looked up, eyes wide as the sun climbed over the horizon. It still hurt to look at, but she smiled anyway. The dawn no longer feared her. Behind her, footsteps, slow, steady. Lucien Valemont emerged from the shadows of a ruined archway, his coat catching the light. He no longer moved like a god. His strength had waned, his immortality thinned. But his presence, the gravity that once drew worlds to their knees, remained. When he reached her, she turned and took his hand. His fingers were warm now, human warm. They stood in silence, watching the first rays of sunlight stretch across the plains beyond the city. Where once there had been only ash, small green shoots now broke through the soil. "Do you miss it?" she asked softly. He glanced at her. "The night," she nodded. A slow smile touched his lips. "I thought I would, but then I saw the dawn on your face." Her laughter was quiet, fragile, the kind of sound that could rebuild worlds. "You always did have a way with words." "And you," he murmured, "had a way with impossible things." Below them, a group of surviving vampires worked to rebuild, not as slaves or courtiers, but as equals beside mortals who had dared to enter the reclaimed city. Children ran between them, unafraid. The air no longer carried the weight of fear, only the hum of new beginnings. Elena knelt to plant a seed in the soil at the foot of the stairs. Lucien knelt beside her, his one spale hands pressing the earth closed. "For Aaron," she whispered. He nodded. "For all of them." For a long moment, they stayed there, the ancient king and the human girl who had called him once from across the void, bound now not by blood, but by choice. Lucien straightened, his gaze sweeping across the horizon. "No throne," he said. "No crown. Just home," she finished. He looked at her, sunlight reflected in his mortal eyes, eyes that, for the first time, held no shadow. And when he leaned down to kiss her, it was not the kiss of a king claiming what was his, but of a man who had learned, at last, to give instead of take. In the centuries that followed, their story would pass into legend. They would call her the waitress who taught the vampire king to breathe again, the mortal who gave dawn to the undying, and love to a heart that had forgotten its own beat. And though the world would change, the city rebuilt and the night reborn in gentler form, one truth remained carved into its heart. That once, love was enough to bring the sun back the diner clock, ticked softly against the quiet hum of dawn. The world outside had long since accepted morning, light spilling where once shadows ruled. Alina wiped her hands on a faded cloth, the scent of coffee and rain mingling in the air. She had grown older, not weaker. Her eyes still held the same spark that had once defied kings and gods alike. Across from her, Lucien Valemont sat at the counter, a newspaper in hand. His hair was streaked with silver now, though the ageless calm in his face remained. When he caught her watching him, he smiled, that same crooked smile that once stopped storms. The phone on the wall rang, a sound both ordinary and faded. Alina froze. It was an old rotary phone, black, ancient-looking, one she'd kept more out of memory than use. She lifted the receiver. "Hello," static first, then a trembling voice, young, human, afraid. I don't know who else to call. I found a man in the alley. He's pale, he's not breathing, I think he's dead." Alina's heartbeat slowed. The world seemed to hold its breath. "Does he have any marks?" she asked gently. A pause, then a whisper. "A symbol on his wrist. Like a crescent." Her eyes met Lucien's. He lowered the newspaper, the corner of his mouth curving upward. There was no fear there, only quiet understanding. Alina smiled faintly, tears glimmering behind her calm. "Tell her," she murmured, "I'm on my way." She hung up the phone. Outside, the dawn broke again, streaks of gold cutting through the mist. Lucien stood and took her hand, his touch still warm. Together, they stepped into the light, leaving the empty diner behind. Somewhere in another alley, another heartbeat waited to be found, another story ready to begin. And so the cycle turned, not as a curse, but as a promise. Hope reborn. The call answered once more.